Okay, my name's Jane Vernon. I'm 46. By training, I'm a barrister, but I'm not practicing at the moment. Very keen on reading, theatre. I'm quite a political animal, so I follow a lot of current affairs, that kind of thing. That's about it.
Okay, my name is Tom Walker. I'm 48 years old. I'm originally from Manchester, now live in Liverpool, which has interesting consequences when certain football matches are taking place. Because I'm a United fan, so living over here is, as I say, always interesting. Usually fairly... what's the word I'd be looking for here? Usually fairly satisfying, because United have been doing very well over the past 20 years. And in terms of hobbies, well, football is one of them. I don't go that much these days, but, I still follow it fairly closely. Quite into sort of music, into world music. And also, I like travelling abroad. I think my two favourite places would be Argentina and Cuba. Cuba first, it was just the chaos straight away, really. The airport was just really, really busy. And because I'm visually impaired, I got taken through customs and immigration really, really quickly. And I was kind of like waiting in this bus for like 2 hours, waiting for people, thinking, my God, what on earth happened? Not realising that they were all in this long, horrendous queue, which was quite entertaining. Because while I was waiting on the bus, I was talking to a chap, I don't know who he was, and I mentioned somebody called Elion Gonzalez, who was a Cuban boy who Cuba had claimed America had basically abducted, which who knows what the truth was. But this man went into this long diatribe about the Constitution and about America and how Cuba was standing up to everybody, capitalism and everything else. It was very entertaining. The atmosphere is created by people and how they interact with me as a person, not as a visually impaired person, but just how they interact, what they want, the fact that they want to speak. They'll come, sit with you, have a chat. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but quite often it does.
You don't actually often get into a proper sort of classic kind of courtroom, but when you do, they are quite big, imposing sort of rooms, very high ceilings, a lot of sort of wooden benches, a lot of velvet curtains. I suppose I'm used to it now, but I can understand why people find that intimidating. For me, I think one of the big problems I've had with it is that I find it really difficult to actually make myself heard in that sort of environment. I probably need to do some voice training. I have to say, I had always been a big fan of Crown Court. And this just sounds like such a cliche, but it's actually true. I'd always been fascinated by that. I'd always wanted to get called for jury service from the time I was 18, and never was. And so I'd always kind of been interested in the court system. Um, Quite a lot of people maybe not want to become a barrister, I think, and that's always been, that's always been the best way of getting me to do something, to tell me not to.
In terms of challenges and problems, I mean, I don't tend to think of it too much like that. But nowadays, I mean, if I were in school now, with all the technology, the magnification, the speech technology and stuff like that, it would be an awful lot easier than it was in my day. So educationally, I think it was access to material, or should I say, having comfortable access to material that was the key. That would have been the key issue.
Socially, I felt quite excluded because I didn't go to the same school as the children in the area where I lived, and I got some teasing because I had to hold things very close to read. I really couldn't understand what all the fuss was about because, I had some sight, I could see that tree, I could see that house, and I couldn't understand what was different about the way I saw it to the way other people saw it. And I used to think, well, do other people see things as bigger or brighter, or, I couldn't understand why everyone kept saying my sight was so bad, because as far as I was concerned, well, I could get around, I could see things, and it didn't seem to be too much of a problem.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, I had an accident, basically, in a nutshell, which resulted in a dislocated thumb, hence, for the viewer, a cast on my wrist. Walked along Pilgrim Street to where we're standing now, crossed the road here, and then tripped over on what I suppose we call the central reservation. I went down like the proverbial sack of spuds, and my white cane pushed my thumb back, dislocating it, and I cut my head open, and it was in generally a pretty bad way. They kind of do and don't understand it. I mean, because everybody in those days was segregated. People, if you had a disability, you went to a special school. So people just didn't understand disability in the way that they're possibly beginning to now. Mm.
I don't really remember that much about it other than it just being a very grey, miserable time. Mm. I think it's one of those things you probably just block out. It was... I really couldn't see a way forward. I really... It just felt like the end of the world.
When I was at school, there was a couple of kids who'd been away, been to different parts of the world, parts of Europe, which was very exotic in those days. And to be honest, we never did that as a family because, I don't know, couldn't afford it, couldn't be bothered, whatever. And I always used to wonder, what would it be like to go to Italy or Spain or France or whatever? And so it was always, kind of lit. The spark was, if you like, lit then, really. So just sort of my imagination, wondering what these places might be like. I think the first exotic country I ever went to was Albania, before the collapse of communism. And once I'd done that, then that was it for me. I was just loved it and knew that I really enjoyed it. Loved meeting new people, loved being in a different environment, the atmosphere, the music, food, whatever other culture, and just being somewhere different, somewhere it was just exciting. You turn up at an airport and suddenly the sounds are different, the smells are different, the language is different. Everything is just, you're just bombarded by this sort of kaleidoscope of experiences, and it's just great. Particularly related to visual impairment, if you're looking for somewhere, then that could be obviously more difficult. A sighted person would see a travel agent or a shop or a bar or whatever, whereas you wouldn't see it as a visually impaired person. So, that's probably the key thing. I mean, again, with technology these days, particularly iPhones and iPods and whatever else, you can probably pretty much store all of the information that you need electronically. So you've got that's in an accessible format. But I've never been turned away from anywhere or anything like that, because I'm visually impaired. I've never experienced any major negative, attitudes. I mean, people just tend to view you as another nuisance that they need to deal with, probably as much as anything, or put another way, another customer to whom they need to provide services.
Oh, so many people have asked that, can you tell if somebody's guilty? Or indeed people have said, which I think is far more frightening, people have said, but how can you tell if people are guilty if you can't see them? And I think, well, that's really scary. To me, that seems really scary, that people would base that entirely on appearance and think that that's so important. I don't think I'm at that much of a disadvantage. In fact, I think to some extent, I'm at an advantage in that I assess people for who they are and how they behave, rather than how they're dressed or, the uniform that gives them some kind of authority. And actually at the Old Bailey in London, the statue of Justice, the figure of Justice with the scales, that is, iconic to what our justice system is about, is always portrayed with a blindfold as being, justice is blind, justice doesn't take any notice of race or class or whatever. I mean, I think many people would disagree with that, and in my view quite rightly, but that's the principle. So in some ways I'd say it's an advantage.
I would say in South America, because it's quite interesting to compare and contrast, I'd say in South America the approach and attitude towards disabled people, certainly towards me, I'd describe it as much more inclusive than over here. I think in the UK, people are either very friendly or extremely standoffish. They don't want to get involved, it's too difficult. Whereas I'd say, particularly in South America, people are kind of interested, and in Spain to be fair as well, they do things because they want to, because they see it as their duty to help and be supportive. Whereas over here, I think they do it because they're kind of legally required to do so. They'll read the menu to you, reluctantly. I mean, not everybody's like that in the UK, far from it. I mean, I've got a lot of able-bodied friends who are absolutely fine, and very, very helpful and very friendly. But if I had to generalise, I would say in South America, Spain, Southern Europe, people are just generally more inclusive, more welcoming, and just more willing to do stuff without being asked, really.
Well, at work, I was by then legal officer at Royal National Institute of Blind People, which was absolutely my dream job. I'd wanted that job when it first came out 6 years before, and I'd finally got it by then. So I was, I had everything going for me. I had a good job. I was in the process of buying a flat. Life was looking good. And I just became very aware that I wasn't feeling great, that for no reason I was getting very tearful. I was finding I was in tears on the way into work on the tube in the morning, and I knew that it was the same problem, that it was depression starting again. I was very, very overworked at the time, and I was just thinking, well, I will just, I'll have to keep going to the end of this case, and then I'll take some time off, then I'll do something about it. And I just left it too late. Now had diagnosis of bipolar, which used to be called manic depression, and that I always had a gut feeling that that's what it was, because I do get these sort of periods of a lot of energy, and that's always gone into my work, and I think that's why, you know, I'd always been a sort of high achiever and got all of that done. That, you know, there are days when I think I can change the world, and there are days when I can't get out of bed. I'm so miserable.
Everywhere I went in Cuba, I just loved the music. You know, you'd just be in a bar for a minute or two, and then suddenly, you know, a band would strike up. You know, and it was just extraordinary. Just, you know, you'd be sitting there, and it's just great. And there was one bar in a place called Las Terrazas, and they struck up, and they were so good. I jumped up from my meal and took my what would you call those things, mini disc player, and paid them $10 to start again. So I recorded the whole set, because, you know, they were just absolutely fantastic. I've still got the mini disc somewhere of that, and I recorded a lot in Cuba because it was so atmospheric, and the people were so friendly. But the music is the main thing that stood out. I mean, Las Terrazas as well stood out generally because it's an ecological area, and so everything, the environment is completely respected. And the hotel we stayed in, for example, had been built around some trees. Rather than knocking the trees down, they just, you know, they used the trees as almost as part of the structure of the hotel, which was brilliant. You know, and just that whole atmosphere in Las Terrazas was good. Havana was good as well. I mean, very busy, and people constantly trying to sell you things, and so on. Despite it being a communist country, there was no shortage of entrepreneurialism, which was quite interesting. In Argentina as well, I stayed in Buenos Aires. I stayed in a hostel called Art Factory, which was a very bohemian place. And the advantage of staying in hostels, of course, generally is you get to talk to people. You know, there are people there all the time, all of whom are travelling around. They all want to know your experience, where you've been, what was good, what wasn't good, where you would go, where you wouldn't go. But Art Factory as well has a bar and a thriving sort of music scene upstairs. So, you know, you just constantly, you know, you don't have to go very far. You can get a bit lazy almost.
My independence is absolutely central to me. I think sometimes I defend that, you know, too fiercely. I've certainly, probably when I was in my 20s, I think sometimes I think scared people off. I can certainly remember, I think I probably missed out on at least one date because, you know, if somebody offered to walk me home, I thought they were doing it because they didn't think I'd get there on my own, whereas actually, you know, they may have had other motives. And I think I was kind of always fiercely independent, and you know, sometimes maybe too much so.
I think it's horses for courses, really, on the independence question. I think what you tend to have is people with different personality types. So you'll have people who are very independent, very outgoing, and the fact that they're visually impaired may present them with challenges, but it doesn't stop them being independent and outgoing. So what being visually impaired probably does for some people is it probably intensifies their lack of independence, their lack of, if you like, get up and go, rather than being the cause of it. So it's kind of like almost superimposes itself on it, you know, onto their personality, and it's like this little film, if you like, this little layer on top of their personality that maybe either intensifies a particular trait or doesn't have an awful lot of influence on it, depending on who you are.
As for fears of, you know, directly my own fears of being blind, I haven't got any.
All right, a bit of rugby. So yeah, so this is sport. So in order to watch this, I'd be very much sitting like this, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the players and everything, can you?
Yeah, I can see
about.
what's going on more or less there.
Yeah.
Because I'm a fairly independent, proactive sort of person, I think if I lost my sight, which probably would be the biggest fear, I would probably still more or less lead the same type of life. You know, I mean, I'd probably have to be more organised in terms of travelling, for example, but I'd probably still do the same thing. I mean, I'm sure my eyesight has deteriorated over the years, you know, so from that point of view, you know, it's a possibility. It happens to, you know, people as you get older, your faculties start to fail. So, but it isn't a fear because, you know, I just think, you know, for me, and it's my approach to things, you just have to get on with things.
Yeah.
It's not always that easy for other people, I do accept that.
People just, oh, well, I've been told I can't do that. And, you know, if you think you can do it, go for it. You won't always succeed, but, you know, better to know from your own experience than, you know, let somebody, you know, stop you even trying.
You know, where possible, just try to not be too self-conscious about the fact that I'm visually impaired, but to face up to the fact that you are. I mean, everybody faces different challenges, some of which are possibly related to their visual impairment. Some of them maybe not. Maybe they're just related, you know, related to their personality, to other issues going on in their lives. But they maybe want to attribute those problems to visual impairment to an extent. So it's quite hard. I mean, it really is. And there's, for every visually impaired person, there will be a unique set of circumstances. You know, there really will. And you know, I know quite a few visually impaired people. Some of them are just out there doing things, getting on with their lives. Some of them aren't, you know.
Slaughter, enter, list view, Outlook, Express message list, Andrews, Tribally, Bailiffs, Warrant, /data, enter. From.
Also interested in developing my own writing. I've got a couple of ideas I'm working on for a novel. I would ideally, ideally I'd like to write, and I'd like a regular column in The Observer, I think.
Oh, right.
But wouldn't we all?
Well, not so much dream of going to, but I mean, I was thinking this morning actually about Japan and China, because they're probably the two countries I've not been to. So although I love South America and those, you know, if I dreamt about anywhere, it probably would be Brazil or somewhere like that. But in terms of interest, then I think Japan and China would be the countries that I would most want to visit at some point in the next few years.
I hope that now, having got a proper diagnosis for my depression and being on more effective medication, that I can at some point get back to work. I don't want to go back to what I was doing, because I don't think for somebody with the kind of mood disorder I have, I don't think something that has the kind of highs and lows of courtroom advocacy, I don't think that's probably a job that is particularly good for me.
Oh, don't make many plans for the future, really. I mean, apart from going on holiday to Colombia, that's about it. I don't have any big career plans, or you know, I don't want to be the next chief executive of some major organisation or even a senior manager. I like the fact that I've got plenty of time for myself to do my own thing, to pursue my own interests. Work's okay, but that's it. I don't have any big plans. I'll see what happens, live life off the cuff and see where it leads.
Don't let other people set your limitations for you. Just actually do what you know you want to do, and set your own expectations of yourself.
And I think the key for me is not to allow the visual impairment to dominate your whole life. So you become almost defined by your visual impairment. I'd much sooner be defined by my political views, by the fact that I go travelling, by the fact that I'm a footy fan, the fact that I like music. You know, those are things that are far more important to me than being visually impaired. I mean, I just accept it as another issue in my life.